You've stepped off the lighted road and onto a path that few return from. Welcome to the hunting path 1408. Tonight's story is one that should have never been told. Chapter 2. The man, the one who had been shot, was now fully upright. He stood there, swaying slightly, his head lolling to one side, a low, guttural moan escaping his lips. His eyes, milky and unfocused, scanned the terrified faces around him. Then, with a lurching, uneven gait, he shuffled forward. Panic erupted anew, a wave of raw, animal fear. People screamed, tripping over abandoned carts, scrambling desperately to get away. David didn't hesitate. He grabbed Lily's hand, pulling her up from their hiding spot between the shelves.
Go, go,
he yelled, half dragging her towards the front of the store. The air was thick with the smell of fear, sweat, and something else, something metallic and foul. The cheerful music that had been playing softly over the intercom was now a grotesque counterpoint to the shrieks and shuffling sounds. They weaved through the panicked crowd, dodging overturned displays and fallen bodies. The checkout lanes, moments ago a scene of mundane transactions, were now a bottleneck of terror. A few people were trying to climb over the counters. Others were just frozen, staring in disbelief at the unfolding horror.
"Dad, what is that?"
Lily cried, her voice trembling, her small hand gripping his like a vice.
I don't know, Lily, run.
He pushed open the automatic doors, the cool, damp air of the parking lot a sudden relief after the suffocating panic inside. But the parking lot wasn't much better. People were fumbling with car keys, engines revving, tires squealing as drivers tried to back out of spaces too quickly. The rain had intensified, slicking the asphalt and blurring the chaotic scene. They sprinted towards their SUV, parked blessedly far from the main entrance. David fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking, the small metal object feeling impossibly slick. Finally, the doors unlocked with a click. He shoved Lily into the passenger seat and dove into the driver's side, locking the doors immediately. Lily was breathing in ragged gasps, her eyes wide with terror.
"That man, he got up. Dad, he was shot, but he got up."
Aaron started the engine, the familiar roar of the motor a comforting sound in the midst of the madness.
I know, Lil. I saw.
He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Figures were stumbling out of the grocery store doors, their movements slow and uncoordinated, but undeniably heading towards the scattering people. He backed out of the parking space, tires spinning slightly on the wet ground. Getting out of the parking lot was a nightmare. Cars were blocking the exit, drivers honking frantically, some trying to force their way through. David had to maneuver around abandoned vehicles and near collisions, his heart pounding with a desperate urgency. Finally, they were on the main road, heading back towards their house. The familiar streets of Gatlinburg were no longer peaceful. There were cars stopped haphazardly, some crashed, others simply abandoned with doors flung open. People were running on the sidewalks, some looking back towards the town center with horrified expressions, others just running blindly, trying to get away from something unseen but terrifyingly real. The air was filled with distant shouts and the wail of sirens that sounded strained, overwhelmed like the last gasps of a dying system. As David navigated the chaotic streets, the true horror of the situation became sickeningly clear. He saw them now, scattered amongst the fleeing crowds and abandoned vehicles, figures in various states of distress, some limping, others dragging themselves along the ground, their movements jerky and unnatural. Their clothes were torn, their faces contorted in grotesque expressions, their eyes vacant and hungry. He saw a woman stumble and fall near the sidewalk. Before she could get up, two of the shuffling figures were on her, their forms obscuring her from view. But the sounds, the wet, tearing sounds, made David clench his jaw so tight he thought his teeth would crack. Lily whimpered beside him, burying her face in her hands. Further down the street, a car had come to a sudden stop, its horn blaring incessantly. A man was trying to fight off a figure clawing at his window, its face pressed against the glass. A silent, horrifying scream contorting its features, the glass spiderwebbed under the impact. They passed a small park where children usually played. Now, it was a scene of carnage. Several of the figures were shambling amongst the playground equipment, their attention drawn to anything that moved. David saw a flash of bright color, a child's jacket, and quickly averted his eyes, his stomach churning. The sounds were the worst part. The low, guttural moans of the infected, the screams of their victims, the frantic shouts of those trying to survive. It was a symphony of terror that echoed through the normally quiet streets. The rain seemed to wash over the scene, but nothing could cleanse the horror from their sight.
Dad, make it stop.
Lily whispered, her voice muffled by her hands.
I can't, Lil.
He said, his voice rough with emotion.
But we're getting out of here. We're going to be okay.
He didn't know if it was true, but he had to say it, for her. They pulled into their driveway, the house looking strangely normal despite the chaos they had just witnessed. David parked the SUV close to the back door.
All right, Lil, we need to be fast. Grab anything you think you absolutely need, clothes, blankets, anything important to you.
He opened the back of the SUV.
I'm going to get the guns and ammo from the safe, and we need all the food we have.
They worked quickly, a silent understanding passing between them. David went to his study, his hands steady now as he unlocked the gun safe. He took out his hunting rifle, a shotgun, and his pistol, along with boxes of ammunition. He hated guns, had only kept them for hunting and self-defense in a hypothetical worst-case scenario. That scenario had just walked out of the grocery store and onto their streets. Meanwhile, Lily was in the kitchen, grabbing canned goods from the pantry, stuffing them into the backpack. She went to her room and came back with her favorite stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear and a small pile of books.
Dad, I got these.
She said, holding up the books. There was her well-loved copy of The Secret Garden, a book on knot tying, and a thick volume titled Edible Plants of the Appalachian Trail. David looked at the plant book, a small, sad smile touching his lips.
Good thinking, Lil Bug. You never know.
He added them to the growing pile of supplies in the back of the SUV. They loaded bags of clothes, blankets, flashlights, a first aid kit, and every bottle of water they had. It wasn't much, but it was what they could carry. As David closed the back of the SUV, he paused, looking around their yard at the familiar swing set, the budding azaleas. It felt like saying goodbye to a life that was already gone. The sounds of the town were fainter here, but the images were burned into his mind.
Ready, Lil?
He asked, his voice a little hoarse. Lily nodded, her face set with a grim determination that surprised him. She was scared, he knew, but she was also brave. They got back into the SUV. David put the vehicle in reverse and slowly backed down the driveway. As they turned onto the street, the chaos was still present, though slightly less dense than closer to the town's center. David gripped the steering wheel, his jaw tight. He focused on the road ahead, on getting them out of here. He avoided the main roads, taking smaller, winding streets he knew from years of living in the area. Hoping to avoid the worst, they passed houses with doors ajar, cars abandoned in the middle of the street. The air was filled with a growing chorus of moans and distant screams, a chilling soundtrack to their escape. Lily was silent beside him, staring out the window, her face pale, her eyes wide with the horrors she had witnessed. David reached over and took her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. She squeezed back, her small hand cold in his. As they reached the edge of town, the chaos began to thin, replaced by the eerie quiet of the countryside. But the silence felt heavy, charged with the knowledge of what they were leaving behind. David glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, seeing the smoke rising in the distance. hearing the faint, horrifying sounds of a town under siege, a town that was rapidly becoming a graveyard. He turned his gaze forward, towards the winding road that led into the mountains towards the lake cabin. It wasn't much, but it was a chance to survive. They were driving away from their home, from everything they knew, into an uncertain and terrifying future. The rain continued to fall, washing over the windshield like tears for the world they had lost. You've reached the end of this story, but the path doesn't stop here. Shadows still stir, the walls still whisper. So if you're still listening, you've taken another step down the haunting path 1408. Subscribe if you dare to walk it again.